Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about four-player games.
If you watch this channel, then you'll know that we regularly play at 2 players. But there are some games that we keep around that are best at 4 players. We have played them all at 2, but they really shine at the 4-player count.
Yeah, we keep them some of these we almost never play at 2, and we just hope that for those times that we've got other folks over that we can talk them into playing those so we can enjoy them at their full count. The other thing that we want to mention real quick is we just kicked off a Patreon. So if you are at all interested in that and you want to pop over there and check that out, we're going to have some exclusives, some early stuff, a bunch of different stuff on there. It's not going to affect everything's still going to be on the channel that you want to see, and hopefully more, but it's just a little bit extra if you want to check that out. And these aren't really in an official order, but the first one we are going to talk about is Root. And Root is famously best at 4, but there's a few big caveats to Root. First of all, everyone needs to learn the game before they even come over to play the game, because there's a lot of learning. You kind of need to know how everything works. You need to know how every other faction works. Everyone's playing a slightly different game. There's a lot of overhead, and it's not going to be for everyone because it is specifically quite a mean game.
Yeah, and at 2, there are options, but it involves having to include the expansions. So having to play with a bot or having to play with hirelings. Whereas at 4, everyone just gets to play their own faction. It has a bit of a target the leader, which I think works really well for balancing it as well. Mm-hmm. So if anybody does get ahead earlier, the other players are going to be gunning for that player as well. So it works so well with all of the different asymmetric factions at 4 players. Our next game is Survive Escape from Atlantis. This is a very cutthroat, mean game. You have these little meeples, and your goal is to try and get all of your meeples to the safety of an island. But everybody has control of getting rid of the tiles of the island and sending people into the water, where there's sharks and there's whales that are going to smash into the boats. And so it is chaos as all the little meeples are swimming around trying to get to safety.
Yeah, we said Root was mean. Survive is like the meanest game that you can play. You're trying to eat each other with sharks. There's no way to get meaner than that, and it's so much fun. And this game came out in the 80s. This came out in like the early 80s, and it is still terrific. I think this game could come out today, and it would still be a hit. It's such a fun game, and it's the opposite of Root in that it is so little explanation. It's just you're going to flip a tile, you're going to move your people to try and get them to safety, you're going to roll a dice, and you're going to attack people with monsters. That's it. I've just explained all of the rules to you, so it's so easy to just get people playing, play right away, and then get people yelling at each other as they murder each other with sharks and whales and sea monsters. So much fun. Yeah. Next up is Space Base. And the awesome thing about Space Base is you're always involved no matter what the player count is. But the reason it is way better with more players is that on your turn, when you roll the dice, you get to activate the cards. And you're going to get nice big bonuses from all those cards. But as you build up your cards and you flip them over and you tuck cards underneath, you get to do abilities on other people's turns. So then every time anyone else rolls dice, you're going to get all these red abilities, and you can stack those abilities. So you can actually get more on other people's turns than you can on your turn. If you play it right, you kind of gamble on different numbers. And it's basically gambling. It's basically like a fun little, you're kind of playing craps in space. And it's so much fun on other people's turns when they roll. And you're like, thank you. And they're like, I wish I didn't give you that.
Yeah, this plays very differently at lower player counts. At 2 players, because it's your turn every other turn, you're really going to be investing in the cards that give you a big bonus for the dice that you roll. Whereas at higher players, you're going to be looking more for the bonuses that you get when you're able to flip the cards. And you're probably going to be trying to do some of those stacks that you talked about to get a really big bonus as often as you can.
And there's also more competition for those ones. You got ones that kind of freeze your spots. That you put them in there, they give you instant points, but now you can't use that number anymore on your turn. But when you play with 4 players, that's not a big problem. When you play with 2 players, that's killing you. You don't want to have a lot of those. But at 4 players, you can take that risk, and then you can build up, especially if you built up some reds. So the strategy is just so much different. And I think the strategy is a lot more rewarding when you're playing with more players. And I think 4 is just the perfect amount.
Next up is Isle of Skye, which is a bidding game. And we played this at 2 players at first, and we weren't a big fan of it until we played it at 4.
We almost sold this at
It
2.
is definitely meant to be a 3-4 player game because you have these tiles and you have to assign a value to each of those tiles. And then if somebody wants to get your tiles, they have to pay you for it. So it's nice because if you lose the tile, you're at least getting money for it. But it is tricky to make the decision of how much you want those to be worth because you also lose the money if you end up with it.
Yeah, this one technically works at 2. And like we said, we did play it a couple of times, but I was like, I think I want to sell this. And then we played it with 2 friends and we were like, this is terrific. This is like a totally different game. And it is because it's not quite a bidding game because you're assigning the amount of money. So it's not like people are going to bid against each other, but there's something in that, just in that assigning the amount of money, and then you've got 3 people, you don't know if someone's going to take it, but you really don't want them to take this one, so you've made it worth a lot of money, but someone's like a daddy Warbucks over here who's going to buy it all.
Yeah, and what makes it interesting too is you always get rid of one tile, and so it can be an interesting decision of like, oh, everyone's going to want this, I can't afford it, so I'm going to make sure no one can have it and get rid of it as well.
The next one is Hegemony, and this is very much my choice for this list because I am a huge fan of this game. And Hegemony is another one where everyone's going to have to do their homework before they come to the night because it's got a big teach, but it's actually not that. It is a complex game, but it's not as complex as you think it's going to be once you get into it because everything kind of flows how you think that it's going to flow. This is a game that's all about socioeconomic systems, and I know that sounds dry, but trust me, it's not. Someone's the working class, someone's the capitalist, someone's the middle class, someone's the state, and you're all working kind of symbiotically, but also kind of against each other as you try to get as much money as you can for your specific class. And it's such a terrific experience. It's amazing if you've got all those people and you've got, 3-4 hours to put aside to play this, and everyone's willing to do their homework before they show up. So you'll know if that sounds like that's your gaming group. But if it is, this is so worth it.
And you can play this at 2. We have played it at 2, but you're restricted to just being the working class and the capitalists. You can introduce a bot so that you have the choice of being the middle class, or 2 bots so you could be any of the 4 factions. And it's just really fun to explore the different factions, but I don't love the upkeep of a bot. It's pretty simple upkeep, but for what's already a fairly heavy game, especially when it comes to like the voting and the like going through all of the different steps, having a bot to look after as well just adds a little bit extra that's nicer when it's a human player.
This game absolutely shines when you've got 4 different people with all of their own needs and wants, and they've got that real symbiotic relationship of, I'm going to strike if you don't pay me more money, and then I'll just go work at the middle class. I don't need to work for your capitalist companies, or I'll go, state, can you open more things because I want to go work for you guys and be more altruistic, and then these capitalists are trying to get more people. But it's so different from any other game that I know.
Next up is Scout, which is a quick, super fun little card game. And in Scout, it's a race to try and get rid of all of your cards. And you do that by playing cards that are higher than what's played on the table. But the interesting thing is your cards are locked in place. At the very beginning of the game, you have to choose whether you want it this way or you rotate them and you can choose the other way. And then that's it. And just that beginning decision makes it really interesting.
Yeah, and it works. It can be played at 2, but it's so much more interesting with more. And a big part of that reason is because of how you play the cards, and because you're building up these runs in your hand, because it's like runs beat singles and then all the same number beat runs. So if you've got like 4 cards of the same number, you're going to beat a run, and someone else then needs 4 cards of a higher number, which is unlikely. So that means everyone else is taking your cards, and when they take your cards and they can't beat it, you're getting a point. And if you can go all the way around the circle, the round's over, and you most likely are going to win that round. And you lose that part of it when you're playing with 2 players. It's so much more dynamic with more players involved, and we've played this at all player counts because we always have this in our backpack.
Yeah, and I would say 4 has been the best for sure. At 3 players, people might pass too quick and the round might be over. At 5, it felt just a smidge too long, and 4 was just perfect.
Next up is Clank, and we're not really going to specify a Clank. The photos are probably going to be of Clank in space, though, because that's the one that we tend to play the most. But Clank is this game where you're diving into you're thieves, and you're going into this dungeon, and you're trying to steal stuff, and you're trying to get out with that stuff. And it works okay at 2 because you still are doing all the thieving and you're stealing stuff and you're still getting out. But one of the great things about 4 is that if someone grabs something and gets out quick first, it makes it way more dangerous for everyone else, because once you're out, you're just pulling cubes out of a bag. And the bag is where all of your clank, which is like the noise you're making in the dungeon, is. And so if they're pulling out your color, you're getting closer and closer to death. So you got to be like quiet and safe, but they also act as a timer. And if 3 people get out and you're still stuck in that dungeon, it gets very, very scary.
It really is the tension that is there at 4 players, because the longer you're in the dungeon, the probably better treasure you can get, but also the more cards you can get, which will get you more points too. Mm-hmm. But at 4 players, I think one of the biggest differences is as well, is that's 3 players' turns before it comes back to you. So if you only have 2 health left, there is a real tension if people are pulling cubes on each of their turns. Even if they're still in the dungeon, you could very well lose. Whereas at 2, you can usually find ways of maybe being able to heal a little bit, or at least get a move on and get out of there. But the tension of, oh no, are you going to pull one of mine? I really, really need one more turn is great. And it's there at 4 players. Next up is Flamme Rouge, and we really wanted to put a racing game on here because racing games typically aren't great at 2 players. And we're like, oh, they're pretty good at 4. But what we realized is a lot of racing games are actually even better at more than 4 players. Mm-hmm. Whereas Flamme Rouge is great at 4 players. It is the super fun, old-timey bicycle race. The characters look amazing, and you are just moving your 2 bikes like tiny little bits along. It's not like this fun, like huge, exciting race, but it's the little inches that can pull you ahead at just the right time. That makes
it a fun, huge, exciting race, though.
Yeah, that is true. And at 2 players, you can play it, but you have to use a bot.
Yeah, and we like the bot, and we play it at 2, but it is so much. There's so much more jockeying for position, because this is a game of inches. Your cards are... they're either exactly as much as you need to finish the race, or maybe not even quite as much. So you need to draft. You need to use that drafting and the like hill bonuses and everything else perfectly. And it just makes you feel so smart. But yeah, we thought like Downforce, Camel Up, Heat, all of those games I think are probably even better with 5 or 6. But Flamme Rouge 4 is just... it's just the absolutely perfect count. And that's what you get in the base box if you don't get the expansion as well. And it's really all you need. And yeah, Flamme Rouge still holds up for me. I honestly, I still prefer it to Heat, I think, because it just feels like, I don't know, it's like the gentleman's Heat.
Yeah, I really like this, just the simplicity that really works.
Next up is Terra Mystica. And I know there might be some folks out there going, why not Age of Innovation? Well, we haven't played it. That's why not Age of Innovation. We'd like to, we just haven't had the chance to play it yet. But also because Terra Mystica is such a simple, like a weirdly simple rule set. I'm always amazed at how easy it is to explain this game, even to fairly new players. But there's so much depth within the simplicity of that rule set, and people feel so smart playing this game. And it's got that like warm, I don't know, I love something about that kind of classic Euro-ness of this game. I like the blocky wooden buildings, and there's so much I like about this game. But Terra Mystica is a game where you're all competing for land. You've got a very small map, and you've got to get buildings onto that map. And you kind of want to build near other people because it can be cheaper, because you can get benefits. But also you don't want to build too near other people because you want to make your own cities. So you're really competing and intertwining. And it really is a game where you're always involved. Even if you're not playing, if other people are building next to you, that's getting you bonuses. And you care what everyone else is doing because things are so tight.
Yeah, and one of the key things is you're able to get a few more different resources by these shared actions that can only be used once a round as well. Mm-hmm. So those spaces can be really important. So you are keeping an eye on who's going there. And this is another asymmetric game. And we love asymmetric games, which is why we picked it up. but it just doesn't work at 2. The map is just too big, and so this is one that we have only held on to just for those opportunities of being able to play it at 4. The last one is Architects of the West Kingdom, which is part of the West Kingdom trilogy. And all of these take place in like 1700s France, roughly. And in Architects, you're working towards building a cathedral. So you're sending workers out and you're collecting like wood and stone, bricks, different kinds of resources. But you can put more and more people at the same spot and get bigger and bigger rewards. But the interesting thing is the other players can then like rat you out. They go to a spot where they're like telling on you for having too many people, collect all of your people at that space up, and then be able to send you to jail and get a lot of money for it.
Yeah, so obviously the reason this is more interesting with more people is that's more people to possibly send you to jail. So you can have a few people building up on one of those spaces, and then they're like, no, I've had enough of this. You guys are going to jail. And you've got to pick on specific people too when you rat them out. So then that is going to build bad blood, which is really fun in this game, because then you're like, you know what? You arrested me last time. I'm definitely arresting you. And this other person kind of is building up a bit more. Then you're both like, they're ahead. We're arresting them all the time. And just the dynamics of having a bunch of different people all ratting people out, sending them off to jail, and building up all of their resources, and the competition for building up that cathedral. It's just, we've played it at 2. It's fine at 2, but at 4 players, it gets so much more dastardly and underhanded.
Also, at 4 players, you're going to be more likely to use the black market, which gives you a big reward, but it also gives you a negative. So we tend to avoid those spaces at 2 players. And the whole negative ties into the deeds and debt systems that's used throughout the whole trilogy. But at 4 players in Architects, I think you're going to just be more likely to be going up and down that track that keeps track of it, as well as the cards that you're collecting to try and flip them over. And the expansions do help a little at the 2-player count, but even then, I think 4-player is better.
And that is it. That is 10 games that we really just keep around in the hopes that we can talk 2 other people into playing with us. And we didn't mention it off the top, but all of these are games where you're pretty much always involved. We don't like a lot of downtime in games, so we really do like 4-player games where everyone is at least kind of active all the time.
Also, please do check out our Patreon, and as usual, thank you so much for watching. Please let us know in the comments what your favorite 4-player games are. Please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.